Have you ever found yourself in a moment that felt so ordinary at first, only for it to shift into something quietly unforgettable? That's what happened to me that Saturday afternoon in my kitchen. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, just another day, another mess to clean up. But sometimes life has its own way of slipping surprises into the smallest corners of our routine. Before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I always love hearing your cities in the comments. It feels like we're all gathered around one big kitchen table. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and give this story a like. It really helps more people find their way here. Now, let me take you back to the moment everything changed for me that day. The house was unusually quiet. My daughter Emily had just gone upstairs to take a call, leaving her boyfriend, Mark, sitting awkwardly in the living room. It was one of those calm spring afternoons where the light spills lazily through the windows, landing in golden patches on the tile floor. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock above the fridge and the hum of the oven warming up for dinner. I was making my favorite chicken casserole, a comfort dish I've been cooking since before Emily was even born. As I stirred the sauce, I caught a glimpse of Mark through the corner of my eye. He was tall, polite to a fault, maybe a little nervous around me. He had that easygoing charm that younger people seem to carry without trying, something that made me feel both fond and strangely nostalgic. Emily had only been seeing him for a few months, and I still wasn't sure what to think of him. But there he was, sitting there, trying to make small talk about college classes and sports while fidgeting with his phone. I wiped my hands on a towel and decided to be the kind of mother who puts guests at ease. "Mark," I called out, "could you help me for a second? The cutting board keeps slipping." He looked up quickly, almost relieved to have something to do. "Of course," he said, jumping from the couch. Within a few steps, he was in the kitchen, standing just close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. I gestured to the pile of vegetables waiting to be chopped, carrots, celery, and a stubborn onion that refused to peel cleanly. He smiled shyly. "You're trusting me with the important stuff, huh?" "Well," I replied, grinning back, "let's see if you can handle a knife before I promote you to sous chef." We both laughed, and that simple moment, just laughter over a cutting board, seemed to soften something in the air. I realized how much I missed this kind of shared quiet. Ever since Emily had gone off to college, the house felt a little emptier, the kitchen quieter, the evenings longer. It was nice having company again, even if it was her boyfriend. As we worked, I noticed the small things, how carefully he watched me slice, how his hands trembled just slightly when he tried to mimic my technique, and how he'd glance at me for silent approval. He was trying, genuinely trying, to make a good impression. It was endearing. At one point, he reached across me to grab the salt from the counter, and for a moment, our hands brushed. It was nothing, really, an accident, but there was something about the simplicity of touch that startled me. It wasn't inappropriate, it was just human. It reminded me of something I hadn't felt in a long time: attention, warmth, the awareness of being seen. I caught his eye for just a second, and he smiled, almost embarrassed. "Sorry," he said softly. "It's fine," I murmured. "You're doing great." We went back to cooking, and the silence between us grew easier. I found myself telling him stories about Emily when she was little, about how she used to mix sugar into tomato sauce because she thought it would taste like candy. He laughed, genuinely, that kind of laugh that comes from the chest, and said, "That sounds like her." Then he asked something I didn't expect. "Did you always love cooking?" It was such a simple question, but it made me pause. I looked at the spoon in my hand, at the kitchen that had seen decades of meals, arguments, birthdays, and holidays. "I think so," I said finally. "It's not just about food. It's about care, I suppose. Feeding people you love, making something that comforts them." He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Emily's lucky," he said. "You can tell this house is full of warmth." That comment, so small, so sincere, touched me more than I wanted to admit. I smiled, turning back to the stove so he wouldn't see the hint of emotion in my eyes. It's funny how someone younger can sometimes remind you of the beauty you stopped noticing in yourself. After a while, the casserole was in the oven, and we were cleaning up. He rolled up his sleeves without me asking and started washing the dishes. I protested, of course. "You don't have to do that." But he just smiled and said, "You cooked. I'll clean." It had been years since anyone had insisted on helping me that way. My husband, Tom, had passed a few years ago, and though time had softened the grief, it had also left behind a quiet solitude that I learned to live with. Watching Mark scrub the pan, humming some tune under his breath, I felt that strange ache again, not sadness exactly, but a longing for connection, for being part of something simple and kind. When Emily came downstairs, she looked surprised. "You two cooked together?" She laughed. "That's a first." Mark looked over at me with a grin. "Your mom's a tough teacher." I raised an eyebrow. "And you're a quick learner." For a second, our eyes met again, just a look, brief and understanding. There was respect there, and something gentler too, something unspoken but felt. Emily didn't notice. She was already scrolling through her phone, asking if dinner was ready. But I noticed. And maybe he did too. As we all sat down to eat later, I caught myself smiling more than usual. The house didn't feel so empty that evening. The food tasted better. The air felt lighter. And as I cleared the plates, I thought about how sometimes the most unexpected connections aren't romantic or dramatic. They are quiet, built from small gestures, shared moments, and the realization that we're still capable of feeling seen, even when we thought that part of our life had long gone still. That night, as I turned off the kitchen lights, I paused for a moment, staring at the reflection of the empty counter where we'd stood together hours earlier. It was strange, really, how something so ordinary could leave a mark that deep. I didn't know what it meant then. All I knew was that something subtle had shifted in me, and that this, whatever it was only the beginning of a story I never saw coming. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how unexpectedly natural it had felt, having Mark there beside me in the kitchen. The rhythm of chopping, stirring, laughing. It had reminded me of the warmth I used to feel when Tom was alive. I didn't realize how much I'd missed that kind of companionship until it was right in front of me again. It wasn't about romance or attraction. It was something deeper, quieter. A sense of being noticed, of being understood without needing to explain yourself. The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains in those soft golden streaks that make everything look gentler. I wrapped my robe tighter and walked into the kitchen. The faint smell of last night's cooking still lingered, mixing with the scent of fresh coffee. Emily had already left for her morning run, but to my surprise, Mark was sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone with a mug in his hand. "Oh, good morning," he said, startled when he saw me. "I didn't mean to intrude. Emily told me to make myself at home." I smiled, still half asleep. "You're fine, Mark. It's early for you, isn't it?" He chuckled softly. "Couldn't sleep. I've got a project due Monday, and my mind wouldn't shut off." I nodded, understanding that feeling all too well. I poured myself some coffee and joined him at the table. The quiet between us felt different now, comfortable, not awkward. He noticed the small vase on the table, filled with slightly wilted daisies. "You like flowers?" he asked. "I do," I said, touching one of the petals. "Tom used to bring them home every Friday. Never missed a week." He smiled gently. "You must miss him a lot." "I do," I admitted, "but time changes the way missing feels. It turns pain into something softer, like a memory that doesn't hurt as much to touch." He was quiet for a while, And then he said something that surprised me. I never knew my dad. My mom raised me alone. She worked 2 jobs and still managed to make it feel like we had everything we needed. I always admired that kind of strength in women. There was something so sincere in his voice that I couldn't help but feel a rush of empathy. He wasn't just polite. He was kind, thoughtful. I saw then why Emily liked him so much. Well, I said softly, if she raised you, she did a wonderful job. He smiled, that same boyish grin that made him look younger than he was. Thank you. I think she'd like you. We talked for a while longer, about little things, really. His studies, Emily's plans, life in general. It was strange how easy it was to open up to him. There was no judgment in his eyes, just a quiet curiosity that made me feel safe being honest. Later that afternoon, Emily had to leave for a few hours to help a friend move. Mark stayed behind, saying he'd wait for her. I didn't think much of it. I had laundry to fold, dishes to wash, and a leaky faucet that had been begging for attention. As I struggled with the faucet under the sink, I heard footsteps behind me. Need help? Mark's voice came from above. I almost laughed. Unless you've got plumbing experience, I doubt it. He crouched beside me anyway, his tall frame folding awkwardly under the counter. Let me try. I moved aside, watching as he fiddled with the wrench, his brow furrowed in concentration. You know, I teased, if you break it, you're buying me a new one. He grinned without looking up. Fair deal. A few minutes later, with a small twist and a click, the dripping stopped. There, he said proudly. Tightened the seal. Should be fine now. I blinked in surprise. Well, look at that. Maybe you are handy after all. He shrugged modestly. I watched a lot of DIY videos growing up. Standing up, I realized how close we were. His arm brushed mine lightly, and I felt a sudden warmth that wasn't from the sunlight streaming through the window. It wasn't uncomfortable, just unexpected. He stepped back quickly, clearing his throat. Sorry, didn't mean to. It's fine, I said quietly, interrupting him. Thank you for helping. There was a pause. For a second, we both just stood there, neither sure what to say. Then he smiled gently, that same disarming smile that softened everything. You're welcome. To break the moment, I offered, You hungry? I was about to make lunch. He nodded. Sure, I can help again, if you're willing to risk it. I laughed. As long as you don't set anything on fire. The next hour passed in the same rhythm as the night before, cutting, stirring, talking, laughing. It was easy to fall into it, that domestic rhythm that made the world outside feel far away. At one point, I reached for a jar on the top shelf and couldn't quite get it. Mark stepped forward without hesitation, reaching above me. His arm brushed the side of my shoulder as he grabbed it, and for a brief second, I felt that same quiet awareness between us. Not desire, not guilt, just the strange recognition of 2 people seeing each other as human, beyond titles like mother or boyfriend. Here you go, he said softly, handing me the jar. Thank you, I replied, avoiding his eyes this time. We finished lunch just as Emily returned. She was cheerful, oblivious to any undercurrent that had passed. She kissed Mark on the cheek, thanked me for the food, and chatted about her day. I watched them from across the table, smiling politely, but my mind was elsewhere, stuck in the memory of small gestures and unspoken emotions that had filled the afternoon. When they left later that evening, the house fell quiet again. I stood by the window, watching them walk to his car. He opened the door for her, always the gentleman. But before he got in, he glanced back toward the house. His eyes met mine for just a second through the glass, just long enough to make my heart skip in a way I hadn't felt in years. And then he was gone. The silence that followed felt heavier than usual. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the kitchen table, staring at the faint reflection of the two of us in my mind, laughing over a sink, fixing a leak, sharing stories. I didn't know what was happening inside me. I wasn't falling in love, at least not in the way people might assume. It was more complicated than that. It was the rediscovery of something I thought I'd lost, the feeling of being alive, of being noticed, of being more than just someone's mother or widow. That night, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. Whatever was happening between us, it wasn't over. In fact, it felt like something had just begun to stir, something neither of us fully understood yet, but both had quietly felt. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet normalcy, yet beneath that calm surface, something subtle kept stirring inside me. Every time Emily mentioned Mark, I caught myself listening too closely, wondering what he was doing, if he'd thought about that afternoon in the kitchen as much as I had. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was only gratitude, or perhaps nostalgia. But a part of me knew better. One Thursday evening, Emily called from work to say she'd be late. "Mark's coming by to pick up his jacket," she said casually over the phone. "Can you give it to him if I'm not back yet?" My stomach fluttered for reasons I couldn't quite name. "Of course," I said, keeping my voice steady. When the doorbell rang just after 6, I found him standing there, the last light of day casting a soft glow over his face. He smiled when he saw me, that same polite but genuine smile that always seemed to reach his eyes. "Hey," he said, "sorry to bother you again." "You're not a bother," I replied, stepping aside. "Come in, it's chilly out there." He hesitated for a second, then stepped inside. The house smelled of roasted vegetables and lemon cleaner. I'd spent the afternoon tidying up, though I wasn't sure if it was for my own peace of mind or because I knew he'd be coming. "Emily's running late," I said, handing him a cup of tea before I could overthink it. "She asked me to give you your jacket." He took the cup, smiling gratefully. "Thanks," she told me. "I hope it's okay that I wait for her here." "It's fine," I said softly. "You can sit. I was just about to take a pie out of the oven." He followed me into the kitchen, where the warm air carried the scent of apples and cinnamon. "You bake too?" he asked, impressed. I laughed. "I do everything in this kitchen. It's my favorite place in the house." "I can see why," he said, leaning against the counter. "It feels alive in here." I looked at him curiously. "Alive?" He nodded. "You know how some places feel empty even when people aren't in them? This isn't one of those. There's something warm here, like the walls remember laughter." I paused, struck by how he could put into words something I'd always felt but never said. "That's a beautiful way to see it," I murmured. He smiled, his gaze soft. "Maybe it's because of you. You have that energy." The words caught me off guard. I turned away, pretending to focus on the pie, but my hands trembled just slightly as I set it on the counter. "You're very kind," I said after a moment. He shrugged, just being honest. There was a silence then, not awkward but thick, filled with unspoken thoughts. The only sound was the faint ticking of the kitchen clock and the gentle hum of the oven cooling down. He set his cup down and walked over to the window, staring out at the fading sky. "I've always liked this time of day," he said softly. "When it's not quite light, not quite dark. Feels like the world holds its breath." I joined him, standing just a few feet away. "It's when I usually think the most," I said. "About life, about everything that's changed." He glanced at me, his voice low. "You seem like someone who carries a lot quietly." The honesty in his tone made my chest tighten. "Maybe," I admitted, "but I suppose we all do, don't we?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, but not everyone carries it with grace." For a long moment, we just stood there, side by side, the silence between us deeper than words. I could feel the faint warmth of his presence, the nearness of another heartbeat in the stillness of the kitchen. And then, without warning, a small laugh escaped me. "You know, you're surprisingly insightful for your age." He chuckled. "That sounds like a compliment wrapped in an insult." "Take it however you want," I teased, smiling. He looked at me, then really looked. His expression softened, thoughtful, almost searching. "I like talking to you," he said finally. "You listen differently than most people." I felt that same strange pull again, the quiet awareness that we were standing on a line neither of us had meant to cross, but somehow kept approaching. I turned toward the counter, needing to break the moment. "Would you like some pie?" He smiled faintly. "Sure, if it's not too much trouble." We sat at the table, sharing the still warm dessert. The conversation drifted to lighter things, movies, music, old stories. I told him about the time Emily tried to bake cookies and ended up with what looked like burnt pancakes. He laughed so hard he nearly spilled his tea. "You two must have a great relationship," he said once the laughter subsided. "We do," I said, smiling. "She's my heart. Everything I've done since Tom passed, it's been for her." He was quiet for a moment, his eyes soft with understanding. "You're an incredible mother." That simple sentence, so genuine, so unguarded, touched something deep inside me. I looked at him, trying to find words, but all I managed was, "Thank you." And then, before I could say more, Emily's voice called from the hallway. "Hey, I'm home." We both startled slightly, exchanging a quick glance. I stood up just as she entered the kitchen, dropping her purse on the table. "Smells amazing in here," she said, peeking at the pie. "You two having a feast without me?" "Just a snack," I said, forcing a casual smile. "You can have what's left." Mark stood, grabbing his jacket. "I was keeping your mom company," he said, his tone light but his eyes flicking toward me briefly. "She's an excellent baker." Emily laughed. "That's one of her many skills." "Come on, let's go." He nodded, turning back to me as she moved ahead. "Thanks for the pie and the conversation." "You're welcome," I said softly. He hesitated, then smiled. "See you soon." And then he was gone again. I stood by the window once more, watching the car pull away. But this time, there was no guilt in what I felt, only a quiet ache mixed with something unexpectedly tender. Later that night, as I cleaned the kitchen and listened to the faint hum of the refrigerator, I realized something that both frightened and comforted me. It wasn't just the kindness that drew me to Mark. It was the way he saw me, not as a mother, not as a widow, but as a woman who still had stories left to live. "Well," he said, his tone lighter now, "mission accomplished." "Thank you," I said, meaning more than just the dishes. He nodded. "Good night, Mrs. Grant." I gave him a look. "You've earned the right to call me Linda by now." He grinned softly. "Good night, Linda." After he left, I stood for a while in the quiet kitchen, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the space he'd just occupied. There was no regret in me, only a deep, unexpected peace. What had happened between us wasn't an affair, nor a mistake. It was a reminder of connection, of humanity, of the quiet beauty that exists in understanding and being understood. Days turned into weeks, and things returned to their natural rhythm. Emily and Mark's relationship continued, sometimes steady, sometimes uncertain as young love often is. But no matter what, whenever he visited, there was always that mutual kindness in his eyes, a wordless acknowledgement of something we shared, but never needed to name. One afternoon months later, after Emily had moved out and Mark had gone his own way, I stood alone in that same kitchen. The sunlight still poured across the counters, the air still carried the faint scent of whatever I'd been cooking, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. Because I understood now, life doesn't always give us love in the forms we expect. Sometimes it gives us small, fleeting connections that change how we see ourselves. That day, when I opened the window and let the warm wind brush across my face, I whispered quietly to the empty room, "Thank you, Mark." And in that stillness, with the light dancing across the walls, I realized something beautiful. I was ready to start living again, not for anyone else, but for me.